The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 59, Fluid Identity. Wholeness doesn't mean being fixed. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. From the moment we're old enough to ask who we are, the world gives us answers that sound like definitions. You are this personality type. You are in this role. You are this story. Find your true self, we're told, and hold on to it tightly. But the truth is messier and far more alive. Identity is not a product to be packaged, labeled, and stored away. It's a process, shifting, layered, relational, constantly becoming. Wholeness isn't about locking yourself into one fixed truth. It's about learning to move with your own unfolding. In this episode, we'll explore why the fixed self is an illusion culture asks us to perform, the many selves we carry, inner child, protector, dreamer, and shadow, and how they coexist. How masks can both conceal and reveal our truths. Why identity is less about arriving and more about becoming. How our sense of self is co-created in relationship with others. And what it means to live as a river, not a statue, fluid, adaptive, and whole in motion. Wholeness doesn't mean fixedness. It means flowing with all that we are, even when we contradict ourselves. Let's begin the illusion of the fixed self from childhood. We are told to find ourselves, as if there is one true final self hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered. Culture repeats this promise. If you just work hard enough, dig deep enough, you'll arrive at a stable, unchanging identity. But this is an illusion. The self is not a product. It's not a single destination. It's a process lived, shifting, contextual. The illusion of fixedness becomes a trap. When we change, we think we've betrayed ourselves. When we contradict ourselves, we feel inauthentic. In truth, it is change and contradiction that keep us alive. Themes: the cultural demand for certainty. Modern society idolizes stability, career paths, social labels, even personality types. We're expected to choose and stick with it. Authenticity as fixedness. The popular notion of being authentic often implies a stable core, but real authenticity can mean embracing change. Fear of fluidity. We're taught to fear change as instability instead of recognizing it as aliveness. Breaking the myth: to begin living unfiltered, we must unlearn the idea that identity is a finished product. Attributes: rigidity, the belief that the real self is singular and unchanging. This makes us brittle when life demands growth. Insecurity: if we don't feel fixed, we think we're lost or failing. Contradiction: our lived experience constantly undermines the illusion of fixedness, reminding us of our many selves. Liberation through fluidity. Recognizing identity as process frees us to grow without betrayal. The statue and the stream. Think of two images of selfhood, a statue and a stream. The statue is fixed, solid, unchanging. It promises certainty, but at the cost of lifelessness. The stream is alive, flowing, reshaping itself as it moves. Our culture worships statues, but our lives are streams. Rigidity of choice. The illusion of the fixed self is comforting because it seems stable, but stability often becomes stagnation. I remember believing that once I figured out who I was, everything else would fall into place. My choices, relationships, and purpose would flow from that one fixed truth. But the harder I chased that certainty, the more I felt fractured. Each new season of life seemed to dismantle the old identity. This tension isn't unique to me. Many people feel like failures because they change their minds, their careers, their beliefs. Society tells us this means we are inconsistent. But what if change isn't inconsistency? What if it's growth? The truth is, we are never statues, we are streams. Personal reflection: in my inner child was broken. I reflected on how the child self remained alive within me, even as I grew older. At times, I tried to silence him because I thought maturity meant leaving him behind. But he never disappeared. Instead, he became one of many selves I carry. In the Inversiverse, I explored how identity is scripted by culture, how we're handed roles, and told to perform them as if they define us forever. I've felt this in my own life, trying to settle into a single version of me that felt respectable, complete, permanent. It was exhausting, and it was false. And in the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, the episodes on shame and control revealed how rigid self-images fuel suffering. Shame tells us we should already be one thing. Control tells us to hold the mask in place. Both illusions collapse under the weight of change. Fluidity isn't betrayal, it's wholeness in motion. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Erik Erikson's stages of development remind us that identity is revisited at different ages. A 20-year-old's selfhood is not a 40-year-old's, and that's not failure, it's the rhythm of growth. When individuals cling to old identities too tightly, they often feel trapped in roles that no longer fit. At the group level, Irving Goffman's dramaturgical model helps us see how the fixed self is socially constructed. Groups prefer consistency. They reward people who play predictable roles. But this pressure suppresses change. For example, a person known as the strong one in their family may feel forced to perform that identity even when they need support. At the societal level, postmodern identity theory destabilizes the very idea of fixedness. Michel Foucault argued that society builds categories, gender, sexuality, and class to define and confine us. These categories create the illusion of a fixed self, but in reality, identity is relational and shifting. Cultures that resist this truth fracture under the weight of rigid roles. Together, these insights show that the illusion of a fixed self is not just personal, but systemic. The work is to stop clinging to statues and start flowing like streams. Embodiment prompt or practice. Take a moment to notice one way you've changed over the past 5 years, a belief, a habit, a role. Now ask yourself, did that change make you less yourself, or did it deepen your selfhood? Feel the difference in your body when you frame change as betrayal versus growth. Insight prompt. Where in your life have you felt pressure to stay the same? What new possibilities might open if you allowed yourself to change without apology? Integration moment. The illusion of the fixed self tells us to carve our identity in stone. But life tells us otherwise. Identity is water, moving and reshaping. Integration here means embracing your own flow, recognizing that each change is not a loss of authenticity, but an expansion of it. Seed to plant, you are not a statue to be chiseled once and for all. You are a stream flowing, reshaping, alive, the multiplicity within. If the illusion of the fixed self tells us we must be one thing, then our lived experience constantly betrays it. We are never just one, we are many. Inside each of us lives a child, a protector, a dreamer, a critic, a lover, a fighter. We shift depending on context, season, and need. This isn't fragmentation, it's multiplicity. The myth is not that we are many. The myth is that we were ever meant to be only one. Themes, the many selves we carry. We all live as a chorus of selves, inner child, adult, aspirational, wounded, and shadow. Multiplicity as wholeness. Wholeness doesn't mean erasing these selves, but holding them together in dialogue. Inner conflict as signal. The friction between selves isn't weakness, it's a sign that more than one truth wants to be heard. Integration as chorus. The work is not to silence any self, but to let them sing together. Attributes plurality, we are not singular, but layered. Dialogue, selves speak to one another, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. Persistence, old selves never vanish, they resurface across time. Chorus of wholeness, the voices together create the song of who we are. The inner chorus, imagine your inner life as a choir. There are high voices, low voices, strong ones, trembling ones. Some try to dominate, others barely whisper. Wholeness isn't about silencing all but one voice. It's about letting them find harmony. Multiplicity can feel like a contradiction. One moment you want closeness, the next you want distance. One part of you longs to risk, another part fears collapse. We often judge this as inconsistency, but in reality it is the chorus of the self. The child in you still cries out for recognition. The protector steps in to keep them safe. The dreamer urges you toward risk, while the critic warns you of danger. These are not enemies, they are companions. The danger comes when we exile one voice. Pretending the child is gone doesn't erase them. It drives them underground, where they appear as shame or rage. Denying the critic doesn't silence them, it makes them sabotage us in hidden ways. Integration is learning to let each voice have a seat at the table. Personal reflection. This truth runs through much of my work. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I explored the ways my child self still shapes me. He never disappears. He comes alive whenever I feel overlooked or dismissed. For years, I tried to push him aside to grow up, to be strong. But all that did was deepen his silence. It was only when I gave him voice, recognizing him as part of me, that I felt more whole. In the Inversiverse, when I looked at identity as a mask scripted by culture, I realized those masks often came into conflict with my inner selves. Society demanded I perform a role that silenced other parts of me. It left me feeling fragmented. Later, I recognized it wasn't the masks themselves that fractured me, but the refusal to admit I had more than one self. And in the unfiltered human on the fringe, especially in episodes on envy, shame, and anger, I found myself confronting voices I had once exiled. These weren't imposters, they were neglected selves demanding a place in the chorus. Wholeness isn't about choosing one voice, it's about learning to listen to them all. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Jung's theory of complexes shows how different selves carry their own drives and memories. For instance, the child complex may surface when triggered, pulling us into old emotions. Rather than seeing this as a regression, Jung framed it as a dialogue with the unconscious. A person arguing with themselves isn't broken, they're in conversation with their inner multiplicity. At the group level, internal family systems IFS therapy offers a model, the psyche as a family of parts. One part may carry pain, another protect, another strategize. In a group context, this mirrors how communities also hold multiple roles: caregiver, leader, dissenter, dreamer. Health doesn't come from silencing some, but from giving each role recognition. At the societal level, philosophy reminds us that cultures, too, are plural. Deleuze and Guattari spoke of multiplicity as the engine of becoming. Societies thrive when many voices, identities, and flows coexist. When societies demand singularity, one identity, one truth, one path, oppression follows. Ireland's referendum struggles, or the EU's push for repeated votes, reveal how power resists multiplicity by forcing singular outcomes. Across all levels, multiplicity is not weakness but richness. The task is not to erase voices, but to orchestrate them. Embodiment prompt or practice: close your eyes. Imagine a table in front of you. Invite three of your inner selves to sit. Perhaps the child, the critic, the protector. Let each one say one sentence. Listen without interrupting. Notice what shifts when you allow all voices to speak, instead of silencing them. Insight prompt: which inner voice have you exiled or tried to silence? What might happen if you gave it space to speak, not to dominate, but to be heard? Integration moment: multiplicity does not mean fragmentation. It means fullness. To be whole is not to be one voice, but to be a chorus in dialogue. Seed to plant: you are not one self to be defined. You are many selves in conversation, singing together the song of your life. The mask as mirror. When we think of masks, we often imagine deception. To wear a mask, we assume, is to hide the real self. But masks are not only concealment, they are also revelations. Masks can protect us. They can allow us to move in spaces where vulnerability would be dangerous. They can reveal parts of ourselves we didn't know how to express without cover. The mask doesn't simply hide the self, it mirrors it, shapes it, refracts it. The work is not to rip every mask away, but to learn which masks serve us and which imprison us. Themes: the double nature of masks. Masks both conceal and reveal. They protect, but they also project. Masks as survival. Often we wear masks to endure environments that demand roles or deny vulnerability. Masks as expression. Some masks permit us to experiment with parts of the self we're not ready to own openly. Authenticity beyond masklessness. Authenticity isn't the absence of masks, it's the awareness of when and why we wear them. Attributes protection. Masks shield fragile parts of us until the environment is safe. Performance. Masks enact roles for others, but also for ourselves. Reflection. Masks mirror the expectations of those around us. Revelation. Sometimes, masks reveal hidden truths we cannot yet name directly. The stage and the mirror. Imagine standing on a stage with a mask. The audience sees the mask, not your bare face. But the mask doesn't only conceal, it also reflects. It shows the role expected, the story told, the truth you're allowed to share. The stage reveals as much as it hides. For years, I thought the goal of healing was to tear off all masks, to be raw, bare, exposed. But I learned that some masks were not cages, they were tools. I've worn masks to survive in environments that would not have welcomed my fragility. I've worn masks to protect the child in me from further harm. And at times I've even worn masks to explore sides of myself I didn't yet feel safe enough to embody without them. The problem is not the mask itself, but forgetting it is a mask. When we mistake the performance for the whole of who we are, we begin to suffocate. Personal reflection in the Inversiverse, I explored how culture scripts identities, the roles we are expected to play. I felt this keenly in my own life. At work, I wore the mask of competence even when I was drowning. In relationships, I wore the mask of strength, hiding fragility. At times, these masks helped me survive, but over time they grew heavy. In my inner child was broken, the mask often appeared as silence. I pretended I was unaffected, strong, in control. But beneath the mask, the child still cried for recognition. The mask revealed the absence of care as much as it concealed the wound. And here in the unfiltered human on the fringe, I've sometimes noticed myself putting on the mask of guide or thinker. It's not false, but it isn't the whole story. The truth is, I'm still learning too. Speaking through the mask sometimes gives me the courage to say things I'm not yet ready to admit in bare form. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Winnicott's concept of the false self shows how masks develop as survival strategies. The false self appears when the environment fails to recognize the true self. For example, a child learns to wear the mask of compliance to avoid conflict at home. As an adult, they may struggle to take it off, mistaking performance for identity. Yet Winnicott also recognized that the false self can protect the true self until safer conditions emerge. At the group level, Bakhtin's idea of dialogism reminds us that masks don't exist in isolation. They are always in dialogue with others. A person's mask of politeness, for instance, is shaped by cultural expectations, by the voices around them. In groups, masks coordinate interaction, everyone playing their part, each mask reflecting the other. But when groups demand rigid masks, e.g., men must never cry, leaders must never show doubt, the dialogue collapses into control. At the societal level, Goffman's front-stage-backstage analysis shows how societies thrive on performance. On the front stage, we wear masks to meet expectations. Backstage, we drop them but only in trusted spaces. In a surveillance culture, however, the backstage shrinks. Think of CCTV or the policing of speech online. The mask becomes permanent. The danger is not masks themselves, but the loss of safe spaces to set them down. Together, these perspectives reveal that masks are not simply lies. They are mirrors, survival strategies, and social dialogues. The task is not to banish them, but to discern which masks serve life and which stifle it. Embodiment prompt or practice. Think of one mask you wear often. Hold it in your mind. Ask yourself, what does this mask protect? What truth does it hide? What truth does it reveal? Breathe with the answers, without rushing to tear them off. Insight prompt. What mask do you wear so often that you sometimes forget it's a mask? What would change if you remembered it's only one face among many? Integration moment. Masks are not enemies. They are mirrors. They can protect, perform, reveal, or suffocate. Wholeness comes not from stripping them all away, but from knowing when to wear them, when to remove them, and when to admit, this is a mask, not the whole of me. Seed to plant. A mask can hide, but it can also reveal. The work is not to banish masks, but to remember they are tools, not prisons. Becoming, not arriving. If the illusion of the fixed self tells us to be statues, and multiplicity reminds us we are many, then becoming reveals the deeper truth. We are never finished. Identity is not about arriving at one final definition, but about unfolding in time. Every shift, every recurrence, every contradiction adds to our becoming. Instead of chasing an endpoint, we begin to live in motion, becoming not a sign of incompleteness, but of aliveness. Themes. Becoming versus arrival. We never arrive at one identity. We continually shift, stretch, and reshape. Identity as motion. Change doesn't erase who we are, it reveals who we are becoming. The creative self-becoming is not passive, it's creative. Each choice, each relationship, each moment shapes the ongoing self. The freedom of incompletion. Not arriving means we are never trapped. There is always room to change, grow, and reimagine. Attributes. Process. Selfhood is lived as unfolding, not as a product to define. Impermanence. Change is the constant. Resisting it causes suffering. Creativity. Becoming is an act of creation. We shape who we are in every encounter. Freedom. Because we never arrive, we are free to keep moving. The path that grows as you walk. Imagine walking a path through a forest. At first it seems fixed, clear, and laid out, but as you move, the path itself begins to grow beneath your feet. You are not just walking the path, you are creating it. Identity works the same way. We don't find the path of selfhood, we make it by walking. The culture of selfhood often frames identity as a destination. Once you know who you are, the work is done. But what if the opposite is true? What if identity only exists in motion? I've seen this in my own life. Times when I thought I had finally found myself through a role, a belief, a mask, life shifted, and the certainty dissolved. At first I felt lost, as if I had failed. But later I began to recognize the shifts weren't betrayals. They were my becoming. This doesn't mean identity is meaningless. It means identity is alive. Each season of life reveals a different self, not false, not broken, but another face of becoming. Personal reflection in the Inversiverse, I often explored the idea of control, how systems want us fixed, predictable, and easy to categorize. But whenever I tried to live inside one definition of myself, I felt suffocated. The truth was always more fluid. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I described how the child self lives on in me. At first, I thought adulthood meant outgrowing him. But I see now I never outgrew him, I became with him. The child walks alongside the adult, shaping who I continue to become. And here in the unfiltered human on the fringe, I've noticed the same with shadow emotions. Envy, shame, and control don't disappear after we work through them. They resurface in new contexts, shaping new responses. This isn't regression, it's becoming. I used to think life was about finding the right definition. Now I see it's about living into change again and again. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, Deleuze and Guattari's philosophy of becoming suggests that identity is never static. We are always in flux, always forming in relation to our surroundings. For an individual, this means that contradictions or shifts in self are not failures but natural transformations. For instance, a person who feels torn between wanting stability and craving change is not broken. They are experiencing becoming. At the group level, Nietzsche's concept of eternal return offers a mirror. If life were to repeat endlessly, the challenge would not be to arrive at one final self, but to embrace becoming as a rhythm. In groups, this shows up when communities cycle through crises or identities, redefining themselves in each era. What seems like instability is often growth in disguise. At the societal level, existentialist philosophy, Sartre, Beauvoir, insists that humans are condemned to freedom. We must continually choose who we are becoming. Society often resists this freedom, imposing fixed categories, but existentialism reframes this not as a burden, but as liberation. A society that embraces becoming allows diversity, change, and reinvention. One that clings to fixedness enforces conformity. Across these layers, the insight holds. Becoming is not failure. It is the ground of identity itself. Embodiment, prompt, or practice, think of one identity you've held in the past, a role, a label, a self-image. Now notice, who are you becoming today that is different from then? Breathe into the recognition that both selves were real, and that neither is the end. Insight prompt. When have you felt ashamed for changing? What would it feel like to see that change not as inconsistency, but as becoming? Integration moment. We do not arrive, we become. And in becoming, we find a freedom greater than any fixed definition could offer seed to plant. You are not here to arrive at a single self. You are here to keep becoming endlessly, creatively, alive. Living the river. We've unmasked the illusion of the fixed self. We've listened to the chorus of our many voices. We've recognized the double-edged nature of masks, the freedom of becoming, and the mirrors of relationship. Now we ask, how do we live this truth? If identity is a river, what does it mean to inhabit that flow day by day? Living the river means learning to trust movement, to welcome contradiction, and to see fluidity not as weakness but as the essence of wholeness. Themes wholeness as flow. To be whole is not to be fixed. It is to be fully present in the current of becoming. Spiritual depth in change. Mystical traditions remind us impermanence is not loss, but the condition of life itself. Growth as ongoing. Philosophy shows us identity isn't just who we are, it's who we are becoming, always in motion toward possibility. Future as potential. Wholeness doesn't close doors. It opens them to futures not yet imagined. Attributes flow, selfhood as ongoing motion, like water through time. Openness, readiness to expand into new possibilities. Resilience in change, the capacity to live with shifts instead of fearing them. Creative potential, every transformation offers new ways to live, relate, and create. The river that remembers and forgets, our river remembers and forgets at once. It carries traces of where it's been, yet its waters are always new. To live the river is to honor both memory and change, to know you are never only who you were, and never only who you are right now. You are what is still to come. Living the river means shifting how we define wholeness. Instead of asking, who am I finally? We begin to ask, who am I becoming now? This shift doesn't erase the past. The river carries memory in its currents. Every wound, every joy, every mask worn has shaped the flow. But the river also forgets, it releases, renews, creates space for something new. Spiritually, this echoes Buddhist teachings of impermanence. Clinging to fixedness causes suffering, while embracing change brings liberation. Philosophically, it resonates with Heraclitus. You cannot step in the same river twice. And existentially, it echoes Kierkegaard and Sartre. Freedom lies in the fact that we are never finished. The river of identity is not chaos, it is creativity. To live is to trust that becoming itself is the path to wholeness. Personal reflection. In the Inversiverse, I came to see how systems seek to freeze identity, categories, roles, and definitions. But each time I resisted that fixedness, I felt more alive. The moments I allowed myself to change, to let the river flow, were the moments I felt most true. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I wrote about carrying the child self into adulthood. The river doesn't erase him. He flows with me, reshaping how I speak, feel, and connect. I used to resent his presence as a fracture. Now I see him as part of the river's depth. And in the unfiltered human on the fringe, especially in these arcs on shadow emotions, I've noticed that each return to an old wound is not repetition, but a deepening of the river. Each pass reshapes the banks a little more. The flow expands. Living on the river has meant accepting not only who I've been, but who I might still become. Psychological and philosophical insight. At the individual level, narrative therapy reminds us that our identity is a story always being rewritten. We can choose to retell old chapters with new meaning. A person who once saw themselves as broken may later weave that same experience into a story of resilience. The river flows forward but carries the past in new ways. At the group level, relational cultural theory teaches that growth happens through connection. In groups, identity expands because others mirror possibilities back to us. A supportive community may reflect parts of the self we never dared to voice, allowing new selves to surface and grow. The river widens through shared currents. At the societal level, philosophy and spirituality converge on the same truth: life is flux. Heraclitus saw identity as perpetual becoming. Buddhist thought sees impermanence as liberation. Indigenous philosophies often frame identity as relational, not an isolated self, but a node in the web of life. Societies that embrace fluidity encourage renewal. Those that enforce rigidity risk collapse. Across all levels, the river is not an endpoint, but an invitation to expand, to grow, to move into futures we can't yet see. Embodiment, prompt, or practice. Imagine yourself standing in a river. Feel the current moving around you, through you. Notice how it never stops and how you never resist. Whisper to yourself, I am the river. I am moving. I am becoming. Insight prompt. Where in your life have you tried to hold yourself fixed? What might shift if you let yourself flow, not just into who you are, but into who you are still becoming? Integration moment. Living the river means living wholeness as flow. It means honoring memory while releasing fixedness. It means trusting that becoming is not a flaw, but the essence of life. And it means seeing every present self as both true and unfinished, a current carrying you toward futures not yet known. Seed to plant, you are a river, remembering, forgetting, becoming. Your wholeness is not in being finished, but in flowing toward what is still possible. The river keeps flowing. We began this episode with the illusion of the fixed self, the statue carved in stone. Along the way, we've uncovered the multiplicity of voices within, the masks that conceal and reveal, the freedom of becoming and the mirrors of relationship. And now at the end, we return to the river. To live unfiltered is not to fix yourself into one identity, but to trust the current of who you are becoming. Wholeness isn't stillness, it's a movement. It's the stream that remembers, forgets, and carries you forward into futures not yet imagined. Thank you for walking and flowing with me. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. As always, stay unfiltered, stay human, and keep becoming James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, the Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, the Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of the Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of the Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within traces food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.